watch this debate from now on. Okay. I'll try.
Or download the app that's on his phone.
Yes.
Please use his phone.
Okay, after this. Yes.
But please get consent for everyone.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, sure.
It's not easy to enter ISIS in the first place, but it's also not as easy to leave. Because the idea that exists in status quo is that you have to be extremely radical in order to be called by ISIS in the first place. This means that it's not as easy as you think it is for you to just opt out of the radical ideology that you believe in. I think the problem that will happen inside this debate is that even if you do you do grant amnesty to these individuals, you can never change their idea of radicalism that they believe in. But even if you can do that, I'll tell you why it's not good for the people on the ground, and it's not good for in general, and why it cause so much harm. So, I'm going to do a few things in my speech. Firstly, we're going to talk about the Muslim community and why they become the scapegoats inside this debate. Secondly, how individuals on the ground question the government. And thirdly, how we can create a discussion about generalization and how we can solve generalization that exists within these bigoted societies. Firstly, we need to identify why ISIS fighters opt out to begin with. Because notice that in status quo, ISIS is losing the fight. Because they are losing the fight and they are losing capital, it means that the lifestyle that ISIS fighters live inside these war-torn countries is also not bearable for them. So it doesn't mean that other places will be more favorable for them. They just think that it's a better alternative to not associate with ISIS anymore, so they can seem like a very holy figure that came out of ISIS, that is repented and all kinds of things. Thai government will not appreciate this. Thai government will not believe these individuals. Have you seen? Secondly, we think that under the idea that it's hard to opt into radical ideologies to begin with, and it's very hard to opt out of it, we think that the best way to ensure that people on the ground are protected and the Muslim society doesn't become the scapegoats is to not grant them amnesty. Because notice how this amnesty works is that you give pardon to these individuals. They are not given jail or relief. You basically just let them into communities. You just let them inside your country. This is problematic because when people notice that you allow ISIS fighters, people who rape the people that existed in Middle Eastern countries, when you are okay with the bombings that happen in other countries, when your very identity as an ISIS fighter is very tarnished and very dangerous to begin with, I think when you allow them to enter the society and you allow people to continue generalizing Muslim communities, not only do individuals on the ground become victims of microaggression, but also ISIS fighters don't get to integrate into society. We think that the burden that must come out of side opposition is to prove that they have to argue why would you give amnesty to these individuals, and what is this amnesty going to achieve towards these ISIS fighters in the long run. Our alternative is simple. We'll give them capital punishment, we'll give them prison in life, we'll give them these people don't deserve these kinds of rights that normal individuals do. Thirdly, what are Muslim communities? I think that Muslim communities in these sectors, in these bigoted areas, have tried very hard in order to get what they want. Meaning, they had to do a lot of protests. They go out of the way to say, "Oh, you should come support us. We are good Muslims. We are not terrorists," and all that kind of things. I think that's under our side. We are able to get more people to rally for their support, and because we make tangible actions to prove that you are not the same as terrorists that exist in status quo. But secondly, we'll also say that under their side, these Muslim communities will more likely to be generalized as these kind of people, as terrorists, and because of that, all their efforts will go to waste. Meaning, all their rallies or trying to fight for rights will also go down the drain. I'll talk to you about that later. Have a seat. So, firstly, what will happen if amnesty is given? I'm going to make it very clear for you, right? Firstly, stigma will exist towards the Muslim community. Secondly, you question the government, and thirdly, the discussion about generalization. How do these stigma exist towards Muslim community? We think it's very simple. Because you allow these ISIS fighters to enter these governments, enter these societies, it means it's easier for them, for individuals to say, oh look, because they're socializing with Muslims, because we can point out towards them that you entered and you are now hanging around Muslims, we think that it's very likely for individuals to associate ISIS with Islam. Why is this likely? Because we know that it's very likely for ISIS fighters to go back to their home of originality, right? Like, let's say if it was in Spain, if it was in France. So under those circumstances, it's likely that their families were also part of the Muslim community. This means it's very likely for people to associate their families with Islam, associate people with ISIS fighters. I think it's very harmful because you shouldn't make a very similar idea that the Muslims that live across your road or live across your road are the same as the people who are okay with bombings and allow your country to be harmed. I think that there's a direct reasoning towards this before that show. Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah. So what you're saying is, if the terrorists go to jail, no one will stereotype the family. If the terrorist doesn't go to jail, people will suddenly stereotype the family.
What? Can you repeat that?
You say people won't hurt the families if the terrorists go to jail, right?
No. Okay, so here's the thing, right? When you allow them, when you tangibly allow them to go meet their families, and you allow them to mingle with the Muslim societies, we think it's very harmful because you directly relate Islam and terrorism together. Why do individuals question the government? Because they lose trust inside the government. This is harmful because they believe that the government is complicit towards the ideas and the threats that ISIS has done. This means all the hate crimes that happen in status quo happen more towards Muslim communities because they believe that because the government is complicit, they have to take matters into their own hands. They have to seek vengeance on these Muslim communities who mingle with these ISIS people, these ISIS individuals. We think it's harmful because the microaggression that exists inside status quo is that Muslims who are not terrorists do not get jobs, are discriminated in status quo, they don't get the proper rights that they deserve. I think we need to make a clear distinction on who is a terrorist and who is not. And the best way to do this is to criminalize and victimize individuals who are evil, who are guilty.
The reason why Islamophobia is still rampant in places like the UK and the US is because ISIS still exists. It's because the acts of terrorism still happen in places like the Middle East. And it's because the Middle East is very unstable that white individuals form stereotypes that individuals that are of Middle Eastern nature or are related to Islam are somehow intrinsically inclined to violence and terrorism. Syria status quo is still unstable and is a hotbed for terrorism because of the civil war that's still happening, right? So even if ISIS is losing a lot of ground, the central body that forms ISIS will still exist. This means that the heads, your generals, will still be there. This means that the recruitment process will still go on, and that explains why a lot of individuals that join ISIS are from the US and the UK. Therefore, in status quo, what we can agree with is that terrorism is still resilient, and we must do everything we can to eradicate terrorism, right? Defectors are minimal contributors to the efforts of ISIS, primarily because the fact that they want to escape or leave ISIS means that they only played a big part role in the formation and the expansion of ISIS, because they said themselves that leaving ISIS is not easy. This means that ISIS either found you, disposable, and it was very easy because you existed on the fringes of the organization. In status quo, which is what we are not for, how they are treated or defectors is that they are stateless fugitives that are still treated as terrorists. This means that in status quo, if they go back to UK or US, they'll be tried and they'll most likely be sentenced to death as a mandatory minimum, right? Meaning, like, regardless of the nature or the scale of whatever they did, the fact that they joined ISIS warrants a death sentence. That is a status quo that we're not willing to defend. We think this needs to change. This results in two outcomes. Firstly, the defectors don't come back. This means that they'll either stay with ISIS or become refugees because they are scared. They want to avoid a death sentence. But secondly, radicalization worsens and you empower ISIS, or you at least retain the structure of ISIS, because recruiters will weaponize the fact that there are people, when they go back, they will be hung, and they will use this fact to gain more sympathy and more support for the jihadi cause. What we want to do is want to limit the growth of terrorism at every opportunity that we get. And our solution to this is to implement the change in status quo, which is to grant amnesty to individuals, right? And we're not going to do this without a model. Our model will be quite nuanced as to how we're going to go about doing this. So firstly, we're going to obviously offer a deal prior to offering amnesty, meaning like you have to contribute significant intelligence and information about the organization and everything you know about the recruitment process before we grant you the deal to be free of jail, for example. And this means that you don't go to jail, but we will retain a certain criminal record in the database, right? So this means that you will be free, but we would know that you have joined ISIS in the past. But fourthly, amnesty, or the process of it, will still go through the process of the deliberation by the judges, meaning you will still be filtered, right? So this means that people who are really guilty of bombing and beheading certain individuals will still be punished, right? In our world, at least we filter out the individuals who only played a bit part role. So we'll filter out the true defectors from the ones who are actually culpable. That's how we can best mitigate those harms in that circumstance. The burden is to prove two things. Firstly, what's principally justified for these defectors that played a bit part role to be punished disproportionately. But secondly, why is it a strategic movement against or towards the eradication of ISIS? Sit down. I will talk to you about three things. Firstly, they're not criminally liable and punishment in status quo is disproportionate. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the harms that arise out of not granting them amnesty, or the harms in status quo that currently exist. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about the positive impacts for the people who are willing to defect for places like the UK and the US, and how that will actually improve discussions towards curbing Islamophobia, right? So firstly, they are not criminally liable and punishment is disproportionate. How so? Three sub-points. The first sub-point is that it is not themselves, the intent to join ISIS is not absolute, meaning the environment that they were nurtured in also pushed them into radicalism to begin with, right? What does this look like? In places like the UK and the US, they've seen a rise in the number of people joining ISIS. It's because of the rise of Islamophobia there, the amount of verbal and physical assaults experienced, the anti-Islamic rhetoric, political discourse, for example, makes them feel alienated and hurt, right? And they don't feel like they belong. And they do it because they have no alternatives, right? And also because the lobby for anti-discrimination laws against Islamophobia is also weak. Therefore, it's a mitigating factor because the reason why they join is environmental. Therefore, they don't deserve a life or death sentence when they come back. And on top of that, they don't really believe in the ideology because the radicals believe in a different strain of terrorism, which is world domination, right? And also, these defectors are unsure of the ideology, secondly. The reason why they want to defect is because they were put off by the level of violence and extremism, and they are not willing to commit the heinous acts like beheading, for example. So that's why they're most likely minimal contributors. But thirdly, in terms of proportionality, you can only give the right amount of punishment in accordance to the amount of crime they did. Because these defectors were minimal contributors, they were the ones who just gave shelter, who did the menial things like guarding prisoners, for example. They are the ones who are minimal, and therefore they should be. Therefore, them being free is justified because they're also giving information and helping your cause against terrorism. What happens to defectors that don't come back? The defectors that don't come back because they're scared of being sentenced to death, they'll either end up stateless, meaning two outcomes. They'll either join ISIS or be refugees. So them joining ISIS means that we can't fully eradicate ISIS because ISIS will have a lot of stateless people to utilize in their organization. But secondly, if they become refugees, they also end up in very bad conditions, meaning they're less likely to be taken in by other countries, given the fact that other countries already have a weak lobby for taking in refugees. Thirdly, what are the positive impacts of this? The The positive impact is very simple. We get information. What can we do with this information? You have more targeted strikes. You get identities of high-ranking officials. You get the location of splinter cells, for example, and information about the recruitment process, because they know what the recruitment process is like. They know who recruited them, right? And all this information is especially important because we're fighting the fight against terrorism, and because the fight against terrorism has also gained negative publicity for being disproportionate and for being inaccurate in what they're targeting. For example, in the drone strikes when they're trying to assassinate Osama bin Laden, for example, right? So amnesty means that we get to cut a deal with these defectors and get important information which makes the arrests of terrorists and recruiters that live in the US and the UK and live in splinter cells, that makes it makes the recruitment process a lot more weaker. We weaken the recruitment process, we cripple the recruitment process that happens in places like the UK and the US. That's when we get to reduce the number of people defecting to ISIS. That's when we get to eradicate, or rather, this is the most strategic step to take in the fight against ISIS, I oppose.
Thank you. Deputy Prime Minister. When you're ready.
I don't think it was ever government's burden to prove to you that these defectors are important people, that they can help you with the fight for ISIS. But rather what we had to prove to you is we had to prove to you that A, if you're going to get these people back, how is it going against the interest of the government and going against the interest of your people? I'll do this on several levels, but first, let's just deal with Sharvin. Because the first thing I can tell you is I never got any responses to any of Amir's material as he tried to talk to you about the whole idea of people trying to fight for laws, especially the Muslim community, since there's so much Islamophobia within the place, trying to fight for activism because they want to differentiate themselves from the ISIS individuals to begin with. With that in mind, we think that we do not want to generalize individuals. That point still stands within this debate. But rather, let's talk about their model. Because the model was kind of convenient. If you shot a gun, it's okay. If you bomb people, it's not good. We think it's so convenient for opposition side to take this burden. We think what would be the rather best alternative for opposition is, for any single crime with the ISIS individuals, we would rather punish all of them within this debate. And we don't think that you can suddenly try to suddenly have the benefit of also punishing these individuals, right? Because that shows that opposition is not principally consistent to begin with. Second thing, they wanted to make their burden seem like all of a sudden we can limit terrorism at the end of this debate. Look, terrorism is an ideology to begin with, right? So that means you have to cut if you want to limit terrorism, you have to cut the access towards the terrorism to begin with. Now, what is the context of recruitment of terrorism? We think that your media is still amplified to begin with, and there's a lot of sources and still accessibility towards those particular platforms. So what does government do when we send out this message where we do not allow defects to come in? The first thing is we tell you that once you go to ISIS, you can never go back. So that means the deterrence factor still exists within this debate. The direct comparison with opposition is you do not deter people, but rather you still give them an alternative, which is kind of flimsy to begin with, because now you still have a lot of problems with society and structural problems in general. I'll engage with my argument. Then the next thing they wanted to tell you is that these people are not criminally liable, they can give you information. Look, we can get information on the ground as well. We think we carry out spies activities when we already are killing ISIS off on the ground itself. We're able to cripple the Terrorism Institute to begin with. So I don't see how that is mutually exclusive. You can get a bunch of defects who they say are people on the fringes, so they don't know anything. So what is the point of Sharvin's speech? It goes to crash and burn and die. Next thing, let's talk about our speech and what I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to talk about vigilantism in general and how people are like so emotionally amplified, how people are so emotional to begin with. So first thing is emotions can be quantified. So why are people emotional to begin with? Some people feel they didn't get closure. For example, the fact that they're not being punished to begin with are the reason why people are angry with this decisions which are being made. The second thing is that there's no check and balance in the jurisdiction. Because mind you, in their world, they want to make some deal and then all of a sudden we get these people back. So you don't have them by trial, which we don't think also runs in line with opposition's principle. So what happens in this debate? The next thing is because people are motivated by emotions, people want to act radically. So what does acting radically look like? It looks like hate crimes. It looks like people naming and shaming the Muslim community, because Amir already told you and they still didn't take it down, how you generalize the Muslim community and your ISIS members in general, because they have to go back to their families, because there's the only people who are willing to accept them to begin with. So what does this what does it make the whole situation seem like? So the first thing is people do not want to trust the jurisdiction bodies and legislation. Panel, you have to note that already a lot of minorities don't like the jurisdiction system to begin with. How people call judges biased. How there's the baits and challenge of juries where you can exempt certain members from being juries to begin with. We tell you already lost it with minorities. Now the comparative is even with majorities, where majorities of your bigoted individuals do not like the fact that they didn't go through any check and balance in order to all of a sudden just get discarded to begin with. See, the comparative with government side is at least we are consistent with the judiciary system. At least we punish them according to the laws which are proportionate to every other single individual who has committed a crime, be it a serial killer, a sexual offender, or any form of terrorism to begin with. We are more consistent with the law and we follow the standard operating procedure that people have some transparency and are educated about it to begin with. Sure.
The problem with consistency is that it doesn't exist absolutely, because like we have informants in organized criminal networks that also cut deals with the cops to give in exchange for information.
Okay.
So legal consistency is not an absolute, because we also allow for certain free leeways to get to cut deals with informants in organized criminal networks to get important information to cripple the criminal network.
Okay, fine. Then I don't think ISIS is the best person to deal with that to begin with. For a few reasons. The first thing is that we think that ISIS is a body which has like many branches to begin with, and it's very ideological oriented. So that means even if you do get some info on one place and know that ISIS is losing its land area, so its representation is based on the ideology. So that means even if you're able to get your info in exchange, we don't think to curb the terrorism to begin with, because they told you that they want to stop terrorism. The problem is that even if you allow people to come back into the system and keep on going out, you allow the terrorism system to keep on living off of it or keep on existing to begin with. You allow the breeding of terrorism to begin with. At least the comparatives under our side, we limit the number of individuals who are incentivized to go to the platform to begin with. So what does this look like more under our side? The next thing is that we tell people, once you go to ISIS, you don't want to come back, we did to them, already told you. Next thing is about politicians and how they want to support the law system to begin with. Because we recognize that once you don't represent your people properly, even your politicians don't want to support your judiciary system. What does this look like? Your Republican people lobbying against the court cases or not agreeing with the jurisdictions from your judges or with the parliamentary system to begin with. So this becomes a burden to the government to try to sustain these ISIS defectors from existing in society to begin with. That means you have to always make sure that they are safe, and which is not going to be the point of the debate. Because the point of the debate for these ISIS defectors is if you want them to get back into society so they can reintegrate and get back into their normal life. The comparative is if you always have to protect them from hate speech and hate crimes, you are never able to achieve that goal within this debate. The next thing is why people do not have to care for these individuals. The first thing is they have no reason to care, and that is because these people have never contributed to them in any way. But rather, these individuals are dangerous, have been a direct threat, have done crimes against them on the ground or against people in general to begin with. These people are people you cannot trust with, and the moment you bring them to their families are unsafe. So let's touch a bit more on Amir's Muslim community point, right? Because he wanted to talk to you about how this Muslim community is trying to like lobby for itself or make itself seem more palatable towards these individuals to begin with. And this palatable looks like you to carry out community services or being more open and being more transparent about it. And the fact that now you have the conflict, the very extreme existing and coming hand in hand with the community, it starts to confuse the narrative of the Muslim community, or people lack an understanding as to what is their position right now. So your Muslim community seems less palatable or less trustworthy to begin with. Even in opposition's best case, they can never actualize any benefit for these ISIS defectors because people will always treat them badly and people will never have respect for them. We already told you that this is not the side we want to take. We want ISIS defectors to never come back. No more ISIS.
It's strange because the previous speaker before me told you that this debate is not about eradicating ISIS, but his last sentence is about no more ISIS. So what is the thing that side government wants to fight for? We told you in a two-pronged idea. First, we want to offer protection to a marginalized group of desperate individuals. And secondly, in the long term, we want to limit the growth of terrorism. How did we argue that stance towards in this debate? First, we offered to you a more accurate characterization of individuals who return or defect. Because if it is true, you buy their characterization that people cannot change, then most likely these are people that are the most radical. These are people that are not trying to come back. These are people that are very happy to die before they are captured and offer information that can end their cause. So who are the people that defect? I think Shah gave clear characterization as to these are people that didn't have any alternatives. These are people that were held at some point and were forced to offer shelter, for example, or were forced to lie, or were forced to recruited without consent. These are oftentimes people that are unsure of their ideology in and of itself, or people who were desperate and needed the assistance that ISIS could provide. And these are people, when provided with the opportunity to escape that cycle, they don't take this opportunity, because a current status quo and under their model, the moment in which you try to escape, you get capital punishment. You die for offering terrorists shelter when you didn't have a choice to do so. This is why it's extremely problematic, because bringing back Sharma's principle, which I don't think so they engaged on, is the principle of proportionality. You cannot give maximum punishment to someone who committed a crime in desperation, or to someone who did not commit a major crime. That's why there are exceedingly high standards of burden of proof when it comes to putting someone through the noose, right? And we tell you these standards don't apply to terrorists in this day and age, because these individuals who have not much criminal liability, people who are desperate, don't get the chance to even forward their case. And by that sense, they immediately go to jail and they immediately get capital punishment, which is wrong, because these individuals were desperate in the first case. But sure.
Yeah, so the comparative is that at least under our side, when you follow the law system, you give an option for a case. The comparative under your side is you automatically grant them the ability to come back to society.
You say follow the law system, right?
Yeah.
But you also say the moment they defect, they get capital punishment immediately. What following law system is that? That's an immediate absolute punishment with no reconcile with how the law system works. I think we are more accurately following as to how the law system functions. We already told you how amnesty actually works under our model, right? Secondly, on this whole idea of the Muslim communities and stigma, I think it's important to recognize that discrimination is not binary. These people in these countries are already being discriminated. There's not been large successes of activism groups that are suddenly going to change the moment in which a terrorist is led back into society. Because first, the argument is that they are not terrorists. They are people who are part of a group that were held without consent, who are trying their best to provide information. Secondly, these people who, even though maybe on fringes, understand how the recruitment drive works because they were recruited. They know of key area locations. They know of individuals' faces. I think these are These are instances that can provide extremely important information. That was how major terrorist cells within Middle Eastern countries were fought and were successfully targeted. So I don't think this idea of the Muslim community stigma, taking them at their best case, if discrimination is significant, we still think that it is not a worthy trade-off to the principles of justice and in the hopes of limiting growth. Because Shadi told you how we incentivize people to defect, incentivize people to come and give information. We think this contribution is more valuable than the fact that discrimination may become worse when discrimination is already rampant and not being able to change anything. We don't think letting these individuals who are innocent come back in is going to change anything. My arguments are as such. I'm going to talk to you about martyrdom and reintegration, and this directly engages with the point on how we will never be able to eradicate terrorism. We agree, to a large extent, I think terrorism will continue, but the opportunity to limit that growth is extremely important, and more important contribution to this debate. Sit down. So what's the premise that and how ISIS survives, right? It's based on consistency, strong belief, and they provide assistance. How do they sustain this? By inspiration, by propaganda. How is this going to exacerbate under our side? Because recognize their contribution, when they recognize the argument when they tell you about hate crime, right? That if people feel as if they've been treated unfair, they will react in a certain manner and hate everyone and then cause violence. That's how terrorists run. The moment in which you treat a brother or sister of their community unfairly, that you don't give them an opportunity for a fair chance. No, sit down. You took one, I'll take one. What is this? Yeah, these people then become meters, right? They become the calling card for all these terrorist groups to rally and consolidate whatever little groups they have and to continuously fight against the harms of, against the pride of vested imposition. That's how they've been operating. This is how they will continue to operate, because this is how they treat individuals as a whole. How do we change this? I think more and more people who are unsure of the ideology, if they understand that if they defect, they are not going to be treated that way, it makes it harder to consolidate whatever ideology that's left. Because people's ideology only gets strengthened when they are scared. They only get strengthened when they fear the fact that they may be incarcerated regardless of what they do. So they are deadlocked into contributing completely to this terrorist cell, and that's how they continuously grow. When we break the opportunity for terrorists or ISIS to be consistent, when we break the opportunity for them to instill strong belief, and when we break the opportunity for them to be the only ones to provide assistance because we can provide them an alternative, it's when you really fracture the premise on which these groups succeed. Finally, I'm just going to run through very easily between the incentives to defect, because I think it's important to recognize these people, although have consciousness, they also have self-preservation. In status quo, regardless of whatever information they provide, after which they've exhausted their value, they still go through a criminal system where they're automatically capital punishment based on their model. Yeah. Then, as an individual, even if I'm conscious and good, I still would want to remain alive. I still want the opportunity of freedom, which is not likely under their model. Under our model, not only do you have the opportunity to contribute against an ideology you don't believe in, but you also have the opportunity to self-preserve and be free. For all those reasons, I'm very proud of you.
You know who Roshan is?
Yeah.
You know you look like him. You dress like him. No problem.
I think that side opposition is very inconsistent, because from the very beginning, let's look at their model, right? So firstly, they try to say on how, like, before you grant amnesty, you have a deal with them, and like you retain your criminal record. What this means is that it's very hard for you to get a job afterwards because you still retain your criminal record, which also means that people can actually access your record to know what you have done, which also means that individuals can still hate on you and individuals still don't want to include you into a society, which means that your integration that you talk about, who want to live a new life, get more money, doesn't happen because they know the atrocities that you have done and you're not punished for it because they just let you go on side oppositions. Yes, but more on that in the issues later on. So I have 3 issues for you today. Number 1, is it right to punish ISIS fighters? Number 2, what is the impact on ISIS individuals? And number 3, the impact on society and also for the government. So firstly, is it right to punish ISIS fighters? I think it's inherently right, because number 1, why so? Because number 1, their radical ideologies still exist. Number 2, they can never return to a normal life. We think that these individuals will never be able to get the life that they had before they joined ISIS. Why is this so? Because number 1, not only were they were only discriminated because they were Muslims before this. Now people have an added incentive to discriminate you even more because you are Muslim and you are a terrorist. Which also means that people will less likely want to associate with you, which means that companies don't want to give you jobs necessarily because you're going to harm their people in the long run. You can't guarantee that these individuals are remorseful. But thirdly, we think that Thirdly, we think that the reason why is because this can harm and risk the people around them. This is especially harmful because, like Vishnu said, when vigilantism happens, side opposition cannot guarantee that the people around them will not be harmed to begin with. Because since they are living with their family, we think that the acts of vigilantism will have a reaction towards their family and will eventually cause a bigger harm to begin with. But fourthly, they try to hide this idea on how these people will give out information, but they are also on the fringes, right? We think 4 responses to this. Number 1, we think that since they are fearful of the violence that's happening around them, we don't necessarily think that they'll give out information to begin with, because they know that ISIS is very powerful.
ISIS is somewhat violent, which means that they won't give out information to protect their own interest, to protect their family's interest, to protect their society's interest. This also means that they are less incentivized to do so, because if they want to move on and they are given information, ISIS will more likely find out that, will definitely know that you have defected from their community and you have given this information. So that makes them an immediate target for ISIS to go for. Even if you say that ISIS is like dying out to begin with, you can't negate the harms that still exist. So we think that the fourth reason is obviously because they care about their current life. So the next thing is how the law system will become much more inconsistent, because they never really argued on how the law system will become much better. Because under their side, if they don't punish these kind of individuals, then would they not punish like individuals who have been involved in war crimes before but are not part of ISIS? You think that if you do punish these individuals, that is necessarily right that you also punish like ISIS because they are most involved in war crimes, no sit down. And secondly, we think that we create much more deterrence, because this is the benefit that happens more under our side. If you think that your environment causes you to become a terrorist, the deterrence that you can never return to your normal life, although how bad it is, and you will never be able to live because you automatically die. I think that it's much more better deterrence and much better incentive for individuals to stay out of it. So we teach the individuals in the community, the Muslims in the communities, not to associate with terrorism, because there's a large deterrent factor, because you obviously die, and since they want to preserve their life, they will not choose to like go with this option anyway. So the last thing is that you obviously punish a person if they have done a crime. So we think that, and if the law says that if you've done war crimes, it's equal to capital punishment, then it's a right decision to go. For second issue, what is the impact on this individual? Because I've already told you that they can never get jobs, because in job applications, in job applications, they have a column, have you been involved in any crimes before, and since it's listed as an offender, you have, so you cannot get a job. No company will accept you anywhere. Even if you enter a company under the worst case, you still get you still get low paying jobs to begin with, because they are not you are not able to like access high paid jobs, because they do not want you to be there at the very first place. No sit down. We think that second reason is that you have more ammunition for the majority to discriminate. Look, you're already a Muslim and you're also a terrorist. What does this mean? Firstly, you're not able to like go out of your house peacefully without being named and shamed. Secondly, you have to worry for your life, because you are fearful that individuals around you will take actions into their own hands, because the law doesn't prohibit anything under their side. Their law does not have proper check and balances to begin with. But we think that thirdly, they'll never be able to integrate into society, because people will isolate them and life will become much more worse. And fourthly, we think that it's okay to stay in ISIS because you don't want these pollutants to come back into society. And I think that another response was they tried to argue on how like individuals will become like refugees and stuff like that. We think that's it's okay for them to do. Individuals will not become refugees under our side because they do not live to become refugees. So you don't see how we increase the problem of refugees to begin with. So yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the spectrum of people who defect are large, but your metric of punishment is very absolute. Tell me, how is that better check and balance under your side?
We think that under your side, you have inconsistency in the fact that who you want to punish and who you do not want to punish. This is problematic because people can identify that the law system is shaky, and people themselves will call out the law system. When this happens, the law system does not warrant a good like decision when they make one to begin with. So always when the law system, when like the judges make a decision, people question it. Even if it is right, they have this big idea like this, since it's very publicized. Obviously, these cases will be very publicized, so people will know about it, and they can eventually they will call out the law system. And the law system functions on people's cooperation. If the cooperation is not there, we think that the law system cannot function. Individuals will most likely take actions into their own hands, because it's a better alternative. You can get much more justice from that. So lastly, how is it impacting the society and government? Because they never actually touched on Amir's like Muslim, like how it affects the Muslim community, and the Muslim community never be able to improve. And whatever achievements that they do indeed have will be delegitimized and scrutinized immediately. That's problematic, and the government will not be able to control terrorism, because under your side, you are just hoping on these individuals telling you the information, which that's not necessarily going to happen in the very first place. Thank you.
think this side has been extremely uncomparative and extremely unfair in the burdens that they decided we need to discharge. I don't think we needed to show you that we're going to grant amnesty to every single repentant terrorist that comes back. But I think their side needs to say you will not grant. It's an absolute thing, which means we can tell you, and we did tell you, that we have the discretion whether or not to offer it. And when it is offered, it is conditional upon the signs of goodwill that you show, right? If you exhibit repentance, you show you want to help, you have critical information. All of these are considerations that we take into determining how the extent to which you're offered amnesty and the sort of freedoms we think you deserve when we let you back to this country, right? So what will my speech be about? It'll simply be answering a few questions. Number one, how does this impact the defectors? Will they increase or decrease, or how does that play out? What is that important? I mean, how does that mitigate the terror problem? Number two, how does this affect Muslims on the ground who are not terrorists and just in those communities? But number three, even if this doesn't help them, why principally justice needs to be given out, and we don't think not offering amnesty is something that is justified. We think that's an egregious form of justice. So firstly, we told you that in a lot of cases, there's a spectrum to the kind of people who go into terrorism, right? Because they usually come from very difficult backgrounds. They've been forced to make difficult choices. They're poor, marginalized due to things like state failure. A lot of them aren't opting in because of a moral or political allegiance. It's because they needed to do so to survive, or they thought there was no other way to get a better life for themselves. What this means is this was an active challenge of their description of what terrorists look like, that they're evil incarnate, they don't deserve any better than the death penalty. And I don't think they actually came back for that, because they never told us how these sort of situations are unreal, or how these sort of situations get better under their side. So what I think happens is that we offer them a chance, and this means, like we told you, right, in both first and second, that this gives them an opportunity, a lifeline, if they question, which oftentimes they are doing right now, given like the decline of ISIS. It shows them that there can be something better for them back home, a way for them to live. And if that comes along with the ability to repent or to try to mitigate some of the harms that they've done, then yeah, if it's in line with self-preservation, that's something that they're likely to opt for. And they never discounted this, which is why we think it's a concession on the impacts of this, which means, number one, you automatically hurt the retention optics, because when they're not given amnesty, then it strengthens the idea of martyrdom. It strengthens the idea of their recruitment, because look how badly you're mistreated, your government not even going to take ownership for you. Number two, it means that we actively get to take away more numbers from their side and reduce their camp even more, so that sustains the decline of ISIS, right? Number three is the critical information that we might have. We'll concede not every single person that returns has critical information, but on the off chance that a few of those people do, that critical information is critical to the recruitment process or whatever else that we told you about, right? We don't think they managed to respond to these things. Like the most we got was they won't give you critical information because they're afraid of retaliation. But I think this doesn't fly with the contextualization that ISIS is growing less and less powerful by the day. But also, like, in the worst case scenario, if you're so important and so highly at risk, right, maybe the government will offer you protection in return for this information. So I don't know. It still works on our side. But what did they talk about? So basically, right, we told you how we think we have more defectors. But even if you, and this will help with the fight against terror. Second issue then, about the Muslims on the ground. Because what we heard from that side, very strongly, their rallying banner was that this means that families will be unsafe when they receive ex-terrorists. This means there will be so much discrimination. But I think that a reality check is in need, because if you don't grant amnesty, it's not like there is no discrimination on your side. Your side is one that actively pushes individuals to radicalization because of the dire extent to which they are being marginalized and discriminated against, right? So we think, at best, on our side, we get slightly more marginalization or stereotyping and all those sorts of things. But what else do? We think that what we show you is that the government acknowledges the problems, acknowledges its ownership in you being radicalized, and that follows through because it tells Muslims that at least their government is taking ownership, is accepting them as one of their own. So we think this is also something that they can use as a defense against all the hate that they're receiving. So we're not saying you solve discrimination, but neither do they on their side. And I think that there's still something that needs to be weighed upon because they seem to take it like it's for granted. Yes.
You take ownership over your people when you treat everyone same according to the same jurisdictory system. That also means that you apply the same legislative system when treating every single defector.
Like there's a reason why justice is subjective, because we realize that every person has a different story. Sometimes that story starts off really, really shittily, and that deserves a certain consideration when it comes out to what sort of justice you deserve. Which brings me nicely to the last clash, right? This principal portion about justice. We told you there are reasons why not granting amnesty is completely unproportional because of the reasons of desperation and why they acted, because of the ability for them to act in good faith in a way that mitigates the damage that they've done and help us in the anti-terror fight, because we need to acknowledge the state's failure and complicity in creating these terrorists in the first place. What did we hear on their side? No direct rebuttals, it's just, no, we must be consistent, we must let these people trust in the judiciary because otherwise they're like vigilantism. But I think, right, the problem of trust in the judiciary is not an item they win anyway, because on your side, sure, maybe the white people and the majorities will be happy that most of these terrorists are being put to death, but you never ever get the trust from the marginalized itself, because all they see is that the government is consistent in failing them at every turn. You never get a lifeline, and I think this is something that is greatly unjust to them in the first place. So if it comes to what the state needs to do, I think the state needs to reevaluate what it's doing and realize that in order to mete out a justice that is fair, that is equitable, it needs to realize that on a case-by-case basis, some discretion needs to be allowed. Some terrorists were really just people put in very difficult situations who are misled but vulnerable and made to make these mistakes. The balance of harm is very clear. We're not saying you get to live your life or make everything go back to normal, but we're saying you don't die. You have a chance to reconnect with whatever family you might have. If that is justice to you, that is something very well worth considering.
I think there are three questions that we asked in today's debate. The first, are all members of ISIS evil and willing? How did we answer this question? We told you that there's a spectrum of which members are recruited. There are times people are radical, people are disillusioned, people fear the fact that they've lost their families, people don't like the stereotype, and then radicalization becomes increasingly bigger and bigger, and they become the leaders of these groups. But there are also people who are desperate. There are people who know that the state will never give them anything, who are held hostage just because they share the same religion as these radical communities, and they have no way to exit these places. For these people who find a way out, what can we do for them? Which brings me to the second question. Do they deserve justice? How did we tell you that they do? We told you that in criminal law, or the principle of which law exists, is when individuals understand or repent, or when individuals cannot provide that they had an intent, they deserve the opportunity to not have absolute punishment. The other side tells you that if a terrorist or if a person who is Muslim, who shelters an ISIS criminal, should get capital punishment just because that person was desperate. That side also tells you that a person who is radical deserves capital punishment. We argued to you that that person who sheltered deserves the chance to come and deliberate and offer his story. And we listen, we deliberate, and we tell him, can you get amnesty? Can you give us anything? And at that point in time, we deliver amnesty if we deem it as necessary. Tell me why that is inconsistent. Tell me why that is not what the principle of law and justice stands for. I don't think so. There were answers to this question. What we had was a very bland engagement on all terrorists are evil, terrorists will harm the society, people are bad, without recognizing that the justice of the principles of justice They do not look at color, they do not look at religion, they do not look at ethnicity. They look at you as a citizen, as an individual. If you can prove that you deserve it, I think by all means we should give it to you. Final question. What is the best way to provide them with justice? Is it by giving them an absolute punishment without deliberation, or is it offering them the chance to contribute while providing a tangible benefit to our side? Because notice, I think the best way to give them this opportunity is tell them you may not be able to get a job as easy, but what you can do is live free. And I think that's what the justice system is about. At any time when we acquit a murderer, at any time when we acquit a rapist, we don't expunge their record. We don't reset their lives. What we tell them is you pay, but you have the opportunity, you've paid enough. We don't need to give you an extra burden of punishment. And I think that's what we're doing to you in today's debate. What did their side provide to you that was the most valuable in terms of contribution, right? They tell you that we will get less discrimination. I mean, in comparison to what? No discrimination? People in these communities are already being horribly discriminated. That's what led them to join these groups in the first place. So I don't see the value of these things being absolutely trumped by a person's individual right to justice, by the fact that they have a right to go to court and explain their problems, by the fact that these individuals can contribute to how we limit the growth of terrorism and becoming a huge problem as we see today. I think for all of those reasons, we are the side that provided you with a principal extension that I think stood until the end of the debate, and B, an outcome that I think is more valuable than the fact of discrimination, which has not achieved anything. For those reasons, I'm very proud to stand on opposition.
Since Danish wanted to quote me, I'll quote him as well. Hate crimes lead to terrorism. So if I can prove to you with many other issues that if we can prove to you that hate crimes exist under their side, we show to you terrorism exists under their side. But let's go through the whole case of both sides. What do both sides want to achieve generally? Let's touch opposition first. Because opposition told you that we want these defectors to come in, give us information, be free. That was their principle, right? The second thing they also want to tell you is we want to limit terrorism. We give people alternatives. People feel good. Third thing is they also want to tell you that the justice system is not proportionate, so we rather give them the best alternative if the justice system fails. We told you that you have Muslim communities trying to really work hard to get validate, that we want to maintain those people. The second thing I want to tell you is that we want to we want to make the legislative system seem as palatable as possible. We already told you about many structural reasons why people do not support it to begin with. And the third thing that we also want to tell you is how we're able to combat ISIS in general, right? And we want to separate the two, Muslims and ISIS. Now, let's go to the model, right? Because we told you that we would go through the legislative system. I'll just walk you through it because everybody just assumes it to be imminent death, right? The first thing is that you have a court trial when you're arrested, right? So that means you can present your case, you have people going against you, then you get a final verdict, whatever the punishment is, you follow and it's applicable. So there is a chance for you to speak up, right? These comparatives to their side is, we already told you a few times why it's inconsistent, because A, they told you if people don't do much, then they just get amnesty immediately. If they bomb a few people, we'll punish them as well. Don't know what's going on, to be honest, right? So there, their principles can't be inconsistent, so we question them. Now, let's move on to the issues with this debate. The first thing is, let's talk about the legislative system in general. Because I told you in my speech why this legislative system is very important to maintain, why people need to trust it in order for your legislative system to function to begin with. The comparative and opposition is, they told you, fine, it's important. Okay, I can't say the word, right? But that means that's why the law system shouldn't work. Why do we still want to revert back to the legislative system? The reason why we do want to revert back to the legislative system is because it's the only form of check and balance where you have everybody on the ground who can at least access it, and there's a standard procedure that everybody can understand and agree with it within the very first place. The point at which we create a separate category for different individuals is the time and the point in which you make it less credible, you make it delegitimized, and we already told you a bunch of reasons why. Even when you come back, principally, you still will not be able to get the benefit of the day, which is to be free, right? We already told you how hate crime is going to exist, your life is full of terror, your relatives as well, the Muslim community is not just. But the second thing that we want to talk about is the environment for people in general. Because panel, they told you that if the environment is really harmful and really toxic, then only people revert to terrorism, right? We already told you in our speeches how hate crime is going to happen much more because people don't trust in the system. If that is true, then you got more terrorists going to exist under your side. But on the second level of comparison with government, right? What we told you is that even if, okay, when we deter people, right, we give people a reason to stop creating that environment whereby the narrative that you have to join ISIS exists. That means the Muslim people be more accountable towards their surroundings and they want to correct how their child, they're more aware in general of what's going on and who are with them, right? So the comparative is that at least under our side, even when the Muslim community makes that realization to individuals on the ground, people also want to help these people because panel, we already told you we want to distinct the ISIS individuals from the normal Muslim people on the ground. So people are more incentivized to help the Muslim community in general to remove those environmental problems that exist to begin with. The direct comparative with opposition is your problem still exists. Your hate crime still exists. So environment plus hate crime, I don't know what that means, like terrorism times 2000. But the end goal of this debate is we've already showed to you how even in our world, we screw the defectors. We know that, but the point is, right, we know that these defectors are people we do not want back. Principally consistent is the way to go for all those reasons I'm trying to propose.
Thank you. Can you just cross the floor, shake hands, and we'll get out outside for now. Thanks for that.